it's like we get to have a light review. The last time we had this gentleman, Captain, speaking to us was back at the UFO Fest last year. And my God, look at how time has gone by. Well, anyway, I wanted to say before we call him up to the stage that if any of you know that when we put Randy on YouTube, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the first time he came, he has probably got 1.5 million hits now and for the Triad Theater. Put us on the map because of who he was and who he is, and he continues to be. So, with that, could we have a huge round of applause for our Captain, Randy Cramer.
Going on? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad I can use my superstar power for you there, Jane, and put you on the map. Thank you. And this is really the first place that I ever did a public talk, so we can thank Jane for helping put me on that. How's everybody doing?
Good. Warm enough. Yippee.
That was really very lame. I'm going to try it one more time. How's everybody doing?
Great!
Thank you. Public speakers use that as a trick to get your oxygen flowing into your brain, so instead of just sitting there like lumps, like you get a little energized for just a second, and it helps your ears work a little bit better. So I'm not too above using cheap public speaker tricks like that. So there you go. But I'm also going to be honest about it and tell you exactly what I just did. So that was a trick. You fell for it. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's all for everybody's good. So did anybody just show up for fun and not know what we're talking about tonight? Okay, one person. All right. Cool.
One person.
No, you cannot take that back. Everyone's going to point at you now and know that it was you. So, we're going to have a chit-chat about one of my favorite subjects ever, which is alien invasion. Or, since we're really not talking about an event which would be perpetuated or perpetrated. I'm sorry, perpetrated is the word I wanted to use. I did not want to use the word perpetuated. Perpetrated by individuals who are not actually our enemy, who are not actually invading, but would be doing it as part of a scripted event, which is essentially how we get to disclosure, right? So, show of hands, how many people have heard somebody go on about hoax alien invasion before?
About what?
Okay.
Hoax alien invasion.
Forget everything you know. Let's start this way just for fun. How many people think hoax alien invasion by show of hands, bad idea? Raise your hand if you think it's a bad idea. Wow, nobody. Oh, couple hands back there. Okay, couple hands. All right. How many people think it's a good idea? Wow, so you don't really know. Everyone's really ambivalent. Good idea, bad idea, I don't know. I'm not going to raise my hand for either one of those. All right, fair enough.
There are possibilities.
Let's hope that by the time I'm finished talking about this, you're going to be convinced that it's a good idea. Okay, let's hope for that. All right. If not, we can discuss it later. We can ask questions, but let's hope that you think it's a good idea. So, where should I start? So the world globally is approaching environmental, economic, sociological collapse. Anybody unfamiliar with that as a problem that we're facing? Okay, good. We know that that's a problem. So it's not a matter of understanding for most of the people who are participating in the decision-making process that that's the argument of whether or not that's happening or not. The argument is not among the leaders of the world, no, we're not breaching towards total civilization collapse shortly. Everyone pretty much agrees, yeah, that shit's happening. And so what we really want to do is avoid that from happening, because anyone who might know a little history understands that when civilizations collapse, economically, socially, environmentally, that you usually have this cascade of other problems that follow, plus usually a dark period, or in some cases an actual dark ages, which was followed by the collapse of Mediterranean civilization, pretty much the burning of the library at Alexandria, which caused the Dark Ages to happen. Anybody a fan of the Dark Ages? Me neither. I think the Dark Ages sucked, and I wouldn't really think that it would be awesome to have another one. So there's no reason why any of us would like to have civilization collapse in such a way that it's going to suck. If we're going to have a change, therefore, of what functions as civilization, then there are some major things that have to switch over, right? And I don't think that I'm talking to a group of people who is foreign to this concept, but we want one of the major things to occur is that we stop pretending as a planet that we don't have extraterrestrial neighbors and they're not visiting us and they're not hanging out with us and they're not engaged in economic trade with us, and we're somehow all alone in the universe, right? I mean, we can pretty much agree. I think I'm preaching to a choir that's going to agree that we pretty much want that to happen, right? Show of hands, we want that to happen? Yes? Okay, right, okay, yes, we want that to happen. That's a good reason, a good thing for all the reasons that we know it's a good reason, right? It just gets us from here to here, where we can stop pretending that we don't have technology that can fix most of the problems that we're facing, that we don't have ideas that can fix a lot of the broken ideas that we have that are not working for us very well here. And that the consciousness shift, not to be underestimated, of a planetary group of people who are all of a sudden not thinking in terms of we're all there is. We're the only thing that exists. This is the only thing. It's all us. It's all thing that matters. Us here on this planet. Nobody else matters. When you go beyond that consciousness to an understanding that we're just one planet with a bunch of people on it in the midst of billions of other planets around, not just in our own galaxy, but in other neighboring galaxies, which we also are some friends with. Because it turns out, once you get past a few technological hurdles and you get to wormhole technology, distance is really not much of a problem. So when you listen to modern NASA people or astrophysicists talk about traversing intergalactic distances, it's this huge problem because, speed of light and thrusting power and so forth, and it's like, it's going to take forever. It's like, no, it doesn't really. Not when you're dealing with wormhole technology. Wormhole technology means you can open a door here and another door over there and relatively instantly go from one location to another. So traversing vast distances through space become a non-issue when we have wormhole technology, which we have. We have that. We already have it. So it's not a matter of understanding that these vast distances have to be overcome. That's already happened, right? So we understand that when we get to that place, everything gets to change. Everything gets to change in a very positive way. Now, it's not going to be without a kerfuffle. It's not going to be without wrinkles. It's not going to be without problems, because there certainly will be issues that some people are not going to be very comfortable with. And believe it or not, scientists are actually one of the most difficult groups that we have to deal with, who are going to have to go through a period of change. Because if you don't understand how difficult it is to convince people of something that they don't want to be convinced of, try and convince someone who is certain that everything that they have been doing for the past several decades of their life is the smartest, most cutting-edge information that could possibly exist, and then tell that person that everything that they know and believe is wrong.
Not gonna happen.
and watch them shake their head and disagree with you and go, oh, I'm not wrong, right? Like, so scientists are actually some of the most difficult people to convince that we're, this close from entering a vast new age of technological, sociological, and intergalactic understanding. Religious folks are the other sort of wrinkle in that curtain, as it were, because you don't necessarily get good feedback from people who are sure on how the universe, who are certain how the universe works, who are certain where the center of the universe or derives from, who made it, what made it, why we're here, and then tell them, I'm very sorry, but everything you believe is completely wrong. Those people don't get along with great change very easily. Most of those people are going to resist that change. Okay?
Yeah.
So when we talk about, no, I'm going to go this another direction. Okay, so let's talk about what we know right now. Right? What we know right now is that let's pretend like there's a table that everyone gets to sit at, except for you people. Okay? Except for me. I don't get to sit at this table either. None of you get to sit at this table. Because you don't get to make the decisions for what's happening in the world. I don't either. Right? But there are people in the world who get to make decisions for all of us that are dictating where we're going as a society, where we're going as a civilization, where we're going as a planet. Some of those people are elected. Some of those people have been elected fairly and justly. Some of them not so much. Some of them not elected at all. Some of them appointed to their positions. Some of them are positions of rank, which they have gone up a ladder to get to. Some of them are in positions of power and authority because they have clawed their way to the top. And other people are there because their dad or their uncle knew somebody and gave them the job. Right? So it's not necessarily a fair table. Let's just start with that. It's not necessarily the most fair table, but this is the table that we are working with. This is the table we have. It's not the table we wish we had, it's the table we have. So if we were to imagine that there is a table and each and every one of those people in the world is really in a position of power and authority to make decisions for everybody else, and we sit those people around that table and we start talking to them about what are we going to do about the problem that we have facing total civilized collapse, because you need those people to understand what you're going to do about it. And you need those people to agree on it. You need them to agree on a plan that you're going to act out on that's going to fix everything. Because if you try to fix everything without those people helping out, without everybody in agreement at that table, it's not going to work. Okay? It's just not. Now, this isn't one large table, as it turns out. This is lots of little tables. But we're going to think about it like it's one big table. And around this table are elected personnel who serve in executive offices around the world. Some of these are legislative personnel who are voted into elected bodies of representation around the world. Some of these are military intelligence personnel who are in charge of intelligence operations or military operations around the world. Some of these people are corporate personnel, contracted personnel, who already have their arm, up the butt of the honey bear, at the honey pot of the cookie jar of military intelligence products, right? So corporations who are already deeply involved in military intelligence hardware, including covert military intelligence hardware, are at this table, right? So it's a lot of people when you think about the people from each individual country that get to participate in this, and not every country gets to participate. But if you want to think of it as what we often refer to as the traditional G20 countries, right, who are sort of the most technologically, militarily advanced, they are the majority of the people who are at this table, right? This is a pretty big table when you think about all those people, or again, a lot of little tables around the world that are a lot of different people that have to have this discussion, because we have to get each and every one of these people to agree on what the plan is going to be so that we can act that plan out. Right? Does that make sense? Does that sound rational to everybody? Okay, I think so. Now, as we have had this discussion around the table with these people, the first part of that discussion was, yeah, the world's going to shit, and if we don't do something soon, it's going to just be like Mad Max, you know, Beyond Thunderdome, and it's going to suck for everybody. And even if you have enough power and enough wealth to lock yourself in a bunker for decades or centuries, it really has come down to those people understanding you don't really want to spend the rest of your life living in a bunker, do you? Is that really living? I mean, a lot of these people are prepared for this, thinking, oh, I'm going to have my bunker, I got everything, I'm set. But then when you really explain to them what the next 50 years or more is going to be like living in that bunker, they start to think, oh, maybe I don't want to live the rest of my life in a bunker. Maybe that's going to suck. Because it would, right? Anyone who just wants to volunteer to go live the rest of your life in a bunker? Anyone? Anyone?
One hand.
Because I know nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to like lock yourself in a concrete and steel bunker where you don't get to see the sun, where you don't get to see the clouds, where you don't get to see trees and hear the birds chirp anymore. Like nobody really wants that. So even though people have planned for that contingency, thinking like, I'm going to be prepared, when it really comes down to it, that's not what they want to do, right? So it hasn't been too hard of a sell to talk to these people around the table and say, you don't really want to live the rest of your life in a bunker. And if you don't want to live the rest of your life in a bunker, we should talk about how we're going to fix the problem. Okay? And most of these people, where they break down in that conversation is not understanding that there's a fix. Or if you're trying to explain to them a fix that's so complicated that they just want to give up after the first 60 minutes of you explaining, you know, and on point number 85, this is what we're going to have to do, step 85. Like, no one wants to have that conversation. No one wants to hear the conversation that it's going to take 225 steps to fix the world, and we're going to have to do this one and this. No one wants to hear that. So, we've basically gotten everybody at this table to agree. Shit sucks. It's going to suck more unless we do something very serious to change it quickly. Because we don't have much time before we can fix these things, or at least put into motion the series of events that would allow us to fix these things before some of these problems become catastrophically unsustainable. Okay? Right. So, two possibilities. Once we get everybody to understand it's got to change. And then they say, well, what are we going to do? And we say, well, at some point, we have to acknowledge, both publicly, socially, academically, economically, that we have friends and neighbors. And maybe they're not all our friends, but they're our neighbors, and they're close by, and they have a lot of things that they would like to share, and we can use the technology that we have, plus technology that they want to share with us, and we can make the world a better place. That's not a hard sell. Here's where it gets complicated. Two paths. Path A, path B. Only two options. Only two. Now, there may be some variation in what plan A can look like, and there may be some variation in what plan B look like, but basically two plans, only two possibilities. Possibility A, take me to your leader. That's what we call it, the take me to your leader plan, right? That's not the invasion plan. Plan B is the invasion plan. They both represent logistical pluses and minuses. So we'll talk a little bit about that first. So, how many people would love take me to your leader as a plan? Like, let's just have the nice aliens come down and be nice, and everyone can just be nice, and we don't have to have a fight about it, and it can just be nice. Everybody like that idea? I like that idea. It's okay to like that idea, right? That's not a bad idea. It's a logistical nightmare, but it's not a bad idea, okay? So, on paper, where we start to run into problems with the Take Me to Your Leader plan is two areas. One is how quickly you get to maximum acceptance. Everybody understand what I'm saying when I say maximum acceptance? Let me explain. So you want the majority of the population, about 85%, to get to acceptance as quickly as possible. And this acceptance is basically the acceptance of, we're not alone, they're here, they're never leaving, right? I mean, once we realize they're here, they're not going anywhere. It's not like they're just here for a week or a short vacation and then they're going to leave us alone. They're here, they're never leaving, and we now change the course of history in the world because maybe in a few years you can buy a plane ticket to Alpha Centauri and you go get on a spaceship and go to Alpha Centauri. It's the same way that you buy a plane ticket to London, right? Because international, intergalactic travel will be a thing. Anybody think that's cool? Anybody want to buy a ticket to Alpha Centauri? Just go check it out. Go for vacation there. See if they got good food. Right? Okay. So there's some, we definitely want to get to acceptance. The problem is, Take Me to Your Leader has logistical nightmare problems, which is that you don't get to 85% acceptance very quickly. In fact, you have almost an immediate 50% resistance. You have an almost immediate half of the population that just goes, no, I disagree. I totally disagree. Whatever's happening, whatever they're saying on the news, whatever, I totally disagree. I don't think that's what's really happening. Now, understandable, since we live in an era which it has become difficult to put our confidence in the news.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that the news is lying to us all the time, but it does mean that it's rarely telling us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Right? So, and since most of it involves spin of some form or another, it doesn't get us to understanding a level of confidence of what is true. So if all of a sudden people on the news are telling us, oh, spaceships landed, there's thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, and actually when we look at the numbers, it's probably going to be more like millions, of extraterrestrials who have landed on planet Earth and have made friendly handshake gestures to various leadership groups around the world in order to say, take me to your leader, right? So that we can start that process. So you end up with about an immediate 50% resistance rate. That's difficult. The other thing that you have to realize is the number of extraterrestrials that would have to make this journey and make this event happen so that it happened with a brushstroke of equality, let's call it, as we go around the world. So how many people think that it would work really, really well if you only had ambassadorial representatives who landed in Washington, D.C., London, Moscow, Berlin, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Beijing, 10, 12 cities around the world? You think that would work very well? Yeah. No, it would not work at all. Because you would have vast areas that would be untouched and unaffected by this phenomenon, which would actually create an immediate backlash of greater levels of unacceptance. It would cause paranoia, in fact. People in the areas in which there was not an immediate, hey, how you doing? I'm from another world, right? Places where that did not happen, people would start to freak out because they wouldn't really understand what was happening in the places where it was happening. So in order for it to work, the entire planet has to be divided up into very tiny grids, very tiny. And which each area of that grid given a alphanumeric to identify that specific area. And then some group from some extraterrestrial species gets the job of, that's your grid. And most of these grids are going to be not just going to be for major cities. You're going to need multiple ambassadorial teams for every major city, right? And for smaller cities, and for rural communities, right? You're going to need people everywhere. Everywhere. Based on the numbers that we're looking at right now, we literally are talking about millions of extraterrestrials who would have to participate in that event to make it work out. Couple problems with that. One, you need a list of volunteers who are willing to do that job for between 3 to 5 years. And you need them in those numbers, in those qualifying numbers. So you need qualified personnel who are willing to volunteer for that job for the next 3 to 5 years. Millions of them. Anybody think that we can get all those people from one species? Just shake your head. No, it's not going to happen. How many species do you think would have to be involved in that process? Hundreds. Hundreds.
How many species are there?
Oh, well, how many stars are there in the sky? All right? So the number of species that we are currently engaging in some form of communication or trade relationship with is just under 1,000. Just under 1,000. That number has leapt in the last decade or so, right? We were maybe at 100, 150 10 years ago. And it's almost jumped up by a factor of 10 within a decade. So we're almost to 1,000. I would think, based on the numbers that we've seen, in another 10 years, that number is going to be really large. Like we're going to be well into the thousands. Okay? Because every time we go somewhere and we meet somebody and we start having a chit-chat with them, and they find out the stuff that we make, and they start hearing the rumors of the quality of the stuff that we make, they want to buy our stuff. What was that? Oh, I guess I should take a second to talk about this. How many of you heard me before talk about intergalactic trade? All right. I'm gonna briefly explain a little bit of this. So, the majority of species that we run into are not like us as far as how we make things. Let me explain. A majority of species that we run into them out in space somewhere, and they're flying in a spaceship, and we're in a spaceship, and we stop and say, hey, what's up? They're flying in a spaceship that they probably haven't changed one thing in the design specs of that ship for hundreds or thousands of years.
Oh.
Why bother? If it works, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There's a lot of species who, once they build something, if it works, that's good. We're just good with that. We don't need to improve it at all. That works. That gets us where we want to go. Does the job. Why fix it? Human beings here on planet Earth, on the other hand, have a slightly different way that we like to build things. We build something, and within the first 5 minutes that we have finished building with that, we start thinking, the next time I'm going to make that so much cooler. Right? We have this amazing drive to make things better and better and better and better and better, which is not the same as many other species have. So it turns out, over the past 7 or 8 decades, that we have started to develop these technologies, these advanced extraterrestrial technologies, which we have started to make our own. We have made vast leaps in a matter of decades that some species have not made in centuries or millennia, because they just don't bother to improve things. We, on the other hand, have been in a competition to improve things among our own military intelligence branches, who are constantly competing to make a better, faster ship, a better, faster ray gun, better, faster, stronger body armor, better, faster wormhole technology, better, faster soldier technology. Anything and everything that we're working on as a technology, somebody is competing with a whole bunch of other agencies to make the best, fastest, strongest, best thing that they can. And we've been doing that for decades now, so that we're at the stage now where our fleet and our ships are better than 90% of the species that we encounter in the galaxy, in our own galaxy. 90%. 90%. That's how good we make shit. Right? Because it turns out, if you want to talk about these really advanced species that make even the technology that we're working with now like child's play, there aren't too many of them. They represent this tiny fraction of intergalactic life, so far as we've run into them. Very tiny percentage. Less than 1%. Right? The majority of intergalactic faring species that we run into are a lot more like us. Not necessarily physiologically, but as far as their evolutionary advancement, and on whatever path that they're on. Meaning most of them still have groups of people, citizens that live in cities of some kind and have to dig minerals out of the ground and have to figure out how to produce energy and how to manufacture things. And most of them, even when they have developed communication psionically, they still communicate verbally, right? The largest majority of them still do. So the largest majority of species that we run into are very similar to us as far as our own evolutionary development, which is pretty good, but you got a long way to go to achieve this sort of idea of super evolved, extraterrestrial intergalactic life, which is just this tiny percentage of the majority of species that we deal with. And I want to shoot one thing out of the air really fast. There is also no guarantee that just because you have a spaceship that you're really evolved. No guarantee. No guarantee. The number of species who have been able to obtain and understand spaceflight are vast, and they're not necessarily smarter or more evolved just because they've done that. Because, like us, they pretty much acquired that technology from somebody else who showed up and said, let's see what you do with one of these. Because there are species who feel that it is their duty in the universe to help every other species develop and evolve. So some people like to say, well, what about the prime directive? What prime directive? You think there's really a prime directive where they just don't interfere with developing species? Are you fucking kidding me? How many species have interfered with our development since the beginning of time? Dozens? Let's just start with dozens. Okay? We're not out of the norm with that. Most species, as they have developed, have had some dozens of other species tinker with their development along the way. Okay, that's more normal than it is not normal. Now, most species, their quote-unquote non-interference, protocol, it's not a prime directive of non-interference, it's a prime directive of don't let them see you. Don't let them know that this is coming from an extraterrestrial source. Don't tell them that right away, because they tend to freak out, or they just worship you like a god, which doesn't help their evolution. So the prime directive isn't non-interference, it's more don't get caught. that changes things a little bit, okay? So there's many species, hundreds that we've run into, and I'm sure it will be thousands more over the next few decades as we interact with them, who are spacefaring, space trading intergalactically, who aren't any more mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually evolved than we are. Let's also look at this another way. When our diplomatic corps meets with somebody else's diplomatic corps, and they have a very nice, polite conversation, we're really taking some of the best of our best to represent us. So is that other species. They're taking some of the best of their best to represent them at that table in that conversation. And that doesn't necessarily refer to the common citizen, right? Because even we know that some of our common citizens are dumb as rocks. Dull in a bag of hammers, right? We know that. And there are extraterrestrial species who've been doing this a little bit longer than we have, and there are plenty of their own citizenry that are also dumb as fucking rocks. It's because most species don't have a curve of evolution or intelligence where everyone's right here. You have a span along that curve where you have the lowest portion of their civilization and the highest portion, just like we do. That's not uncommon at all. So again, don't presume just because someone's got a spaceship or they're really smart that everyone else on their planet's just like them. Just as smart, just as evolved, just as educated, just as capable, just as consciously aware. Not true in most cases. In most cases, you have a curve of variation among every species. So, we make better stuff. That's where I was going with this, right? We make better stuff. We make amazing stuff. You can't answer this question. Anybody want to take a guess at what 3 of our major exports from our solar system to the rest of the intergalactic community are?
Beer, coffee.
Whoever said
Chocolate.
beer, whoever said beer, beer. That's like number 2. Coffee I understand is more like about a number 10 or 15. It's down there. Chocolate. Yes. Chocolate's up there too from what I understand. It's wine, fermented, everything. Right? Beer, wine, liquor, right?
Minerals, gold, silver.
Precious metals. Absolutely.
Water.
Biological component, biological technology, that's top 20.
Water?
Water is also, we'll call that a top 20. Because the truth is you don't want to export much of your water.
Vegetation.
Plant life, biological matter, and that's like a top 20. No one said like the other 2 that I'm thinking of. Cheese. Okay, now what did I just say about our ability to develop technology faster and faster and faster, and that we make some of the best spaceships, some of the best ray guns in this part of the galaxy? Remember that part? Military hardware. Military hardware. We are this corner of the galaxy's arms merchant right now. Yeah. That's a little sarcasm, right? I mean, because, yay! Like, I mean, we're just like, we're really good at being war merchants, and there's a part of us that would like to think, no, we're going to get into space, and we're going to trade with other people, and war is going to be a thing of the past, and we're not going to have to deal with that anymore. Wrong. Just wrong. And it's because there's a simple truth that we understand about most of what it means to be a member of the intergalactic community. It's not a safe place out there. It's not. Now, let's talk percentages real quick again. So, before I say, what's the, anyone want to guess what the number 3 export is before I go on, before I talk what I'm talking about?
Body part.
So we got military hardware is number 1. Beer and fermented drinks is 2. What's 3? Anybody want to know 3? You can't answer.
Human.
No. It's something that you're probably not going to think of, but if you stop to think about it, you might think about it. Again, we like to make things. Think about things that we make that we're constantly improving upon. Constantly.
Engineering. Engineering.
Clothing.
Whoa.
Clothing is number 3.
Especially children's clothing, as it turns out. Children's clothing is the number 3 export. Now, most of that clothing is not going to dress children. Most of that clothing is going to dress extraterrestrials who are, about yay high.
Oh.
This is an easy one if anyone wants to shout this one out. What is the most common garment in the galaxy? Who said the robe? The robe. It's the robe. Simple. Couple cuts, couple stitches, you got clothing, robe. The most common clothing worn by the majority of species who wear clothing, and there are many species who wear no clothing. They think it's an offense. Why would I want to cover myself up? right? There are intergalactic nudists. Right? They think it is an affront to the divine to cover up what has been given to them by the divine. Why would they want to cover up? They're naked as jaybirds, wherever they go. But everybody else wants to cover up, most common thing, the robe. How long has it been since we've worn robes as a civilization? A while. Right? We have been constantly improving trousers, shirts, buttons, zippers, all these different things that we can wear because fashion is bored a year after you make something, right? You gotta make something else. So again, it's that constantly upgrading a technology that doesn't need to be upgraded, doesn't have to be upgraded, but we do anyway. So our sense of fashion is one of the things that we are intergalactically renowned for. Right? And beer is not something that was given to, that we did not make up, right? Beer was given to us by an extraterrestrial species, right? Someone else came to us and was like, I want you to make my beer, right? Taught us how to do fermentation, taught us how to make beer, grow grapes, so that we could make beer and wine for other extraterrestrial beings. But again, we like to improve things. So we've been improving on those recipes again and again and again and again, every year, every harvest, like improving it. So if you were to do a beer taste test among intergalactic brands, you would not be too surprised to find out that Earth beer tastes better. Because again, we're good at it, right? We're good at it. We've been right? I mean, there are people that still drink mead. There are species that still like, no, we make mead. It's like, why? Why? Anybody ever had a real glass of mead? It's terrible. It's horrible. It tastes awful. Tastes terrible. Get some filtration going, right? Put some other ingredients in there, like balance out your hops, like make it take, keep your fermentation for a certain amount of time, and much better. Oh yeah, intergalactic trade. Okay, so right now we are trading with hundreds of intergalactic species, a whole list of things that we make better than anybody else does. So when we run into other species that we've never met before, we have a reputation. And they're like, oh, you're the guys from Earth. I hear you got that Earth beer. Do you have a sample for us? Can we try some? Because we really heard you guys got great beer. So every time we meet another species, that's another trade agreement, right? With about 95% of the species that we run into. That's a lot. That's a lot. I saw your hand, Mom. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With all the shit, these guys are saying, no, put your hand down.
Go ahead.
So who is it? Is it like the Department of Trade? I mean, who trades with them? Like if I was a brewer, I don't just go, Earth to outer space, come get my beer. How does the trade happen? And the second part of the question is, President Trump announced a couple months ago something about a new space agency, and I suspect it was the old space agency that he just made public.
Correct. That's two questions. All right, so two questions that were being asked there. One, mentioned about the Space Force, right?
Right.
Real quickly, I'll cover that. So obviously the Space Force up front, right? Because we've had one for quite a while. But now we have one officially, right? So they have a headquarters, they've got a CO, they've got a Twitter handle, right? They can now be official, which gives us the opportunity to use that front to release technology that we've had for a very long time. And for them to say, look what we got, look what we just made.
Right.
Wow, isn't this so cool? Even if it's the most antique freaking thing in the space program that we have, they can still go, look what we got, it's so cool, right? Okay, so that's to answer that question. First question you were asking is, what's the process for trading beer? Like, how does that happen,
Beer,
right?
clothing, anything.
Anything, right.
Why can't somebody else make a simple roll?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I will try to talk about this in a way that won't make everybody go to sleep, because it's essentially a conversation about economics, right? It's a macro sort of economics question, which most of the time when you talk about macroeconomics, people go, and they don't want to, they can't pay attention. But since we're talking about something way cooler, which is intergalactic macroeconomics, maybe everybody will stay away from that. So we're kind of like this. So representatives from two different worlds will sit down and have a conversation. And that conversation will be a lengthy discussion about who are you, who am I, what have you got, what have we got. And then at some point down the road of usually several conversations that those two groups will have, at some point there will be a discussion about, well, we want a certain amount of X, Y, and Z of whatever you have for sale that we like, and we're going to trade you something X, Y, and Z that we have that you like, and they come up with a trade agreement. And that trade agreement is a basic agreement on so many units over a period of time of whatever we're agreeing to trade upon. Now, the people having that conversation are not responsible for the actual trade. They're just negotiating the contract. Once the contract has been sorted out and everyone's agreed to it and everyone's signed off on it, then the actual requirements of each contract are given to special import-exporters, right? Whose job it is to then look at that contract and say, all right, I gotta get 5,000 gallons of beer and 3,000 gallons of wine and 400,000 units of children's clothing. It's just simple. And so then those importer-exporters now are responsible for going to various companies that produce those things and buying them. And saying, I want to buy this much from you and this much from you. They spread it out, right? And they buy all that stuff. And they have it shipped somewhere that it then gets put onto a spaceship and then carted off somewhere, right? And same thing happens on the other side, right? Those people have their own commerce department of importer-exporters that are responsible for acquiring what's on the contract and shipping it to us. And then there's some specifics that's hammered out over what the value of those things are. There's some estimations that are done, and then there's some specifics that are done, and then there's an exchange of material, and in many cases an exchange of a monetary exchange, which, as it turns out, at least primarily in our galaxy and most other galaxies that we know of that have trade, it's still a gold-backed system. Does that surprise anybody?
Yes. Right.
Does it really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, turns out gold is a fairly precious metal everywhere you go, right? There isn't a planet somewhere that's just made of gold, right? There's gold just about everywhere, but it's not the major element of just about any planet that we have so far better understand. Based on the periodic chart, periodic table, certain things just appear more likely and more often than other materials do. Right? And now there are some places that have more what we'll say are rare earth elements than some other places, because we call them rare earth elements because they're rare here. It doesn't mean they're rare everywhere else. But gold is kind of this semi-rare metal material that, because it's used for electrical components, it's used for engineering, its value as a product is so high in advanced civilizations that it still becomes an easy thing to which to base an economy on. So there is an intergalactic exchange rate that's based on gold. Yes, ma'am.
So what are the three things that we want to trade that come to us?
Probably the top thing would be rare earth elements, would be the elements that are rare here, that we would like to get from somewhere else cheaper. We certainly are doing our own asteroid mining right now in the asteroid belt, but if we can come up with someone who's got cheaper materials or cheaper metals than what it costs us to mine them, then obviously we're going to want to trade for that, because you know, if someone else is producing it very, very cheaply and can say, no, I can get you that for $2 a ton, you know, the equivalent of, instead of $100 a ton, then we're going to go, we want to buy that from you because that represents a significant savings economically per ton on whatever that rare earth element would be. So rare earth elements,
Yeah, what are
technology, like selenium, molybdenum, what's the other, all the ones we use to make the batteries out of, right? So lithium, right? Stuff, most of the things that go into our electronic components, into your phones, your laptops, into computers, those electronic components often require more rare earth elements than they do common elements like iron or nickel. Technology would be the other thing. We're constantly looking for advanced technology. We're constantly looking for people who can build technology, in some cases cheaper than we can. So there are some species who have mastered certain technologies that can still provide, you know, working models of things for less money or less value cost per unit than what we can build them for. So we're still, you know, always looking for that great deal, essentially. Anything that we can get somewhere else for a better deal than we can make it, we want some of that. Now there's also issues of supply and demand, where we can make a certain amount of the things that we want to be able to make, but our manufacturing is still trying to catch up with some of that, with some of the demand. And so in some cases, we do what a lot of traders do. We look for other people that we can get very cheap versions of those things, buy them, and then resell them to other species at a markup. Okay.
That's cool.
All right.
So it's,
All right, so everybody get intergalactic commerce just a little bit? All right, okay. So that's 95% of everybody that we run into wants to trade. They want to play nice and they want to trade. That doesn't mean that they're all nice. That doesn't mean you can't offend them, tick them off, end up with a problem, but most people want to play nice and trade. It's that 5% that makes the universe an unsafe place. Okay? And 5% is a lot. Right? When you're talking about thousands of species, tens of thousands of species, hundreds of thousands of species, 5% becomes a lot. It's not the majority, but it's a lot. So the reason we need military hardware is that 5%. Yes, ma'am.
So who are the purchasing agents? I mean, who are the ones that make the deal and get the profits?
The import-exporters are essentially working for banking companies, for banking consortiums. So the banking consortiums are still making sure that they're getting their major cut by putting up the money and giving them the loans, etc., that they need to do that with. So everybody gets their cut. The bankers are probably still getting the biggest cut. The importer-exporters get a cut. And then manufacturers and producers are getting their cut. So, but it's the bankers who are still getting, you know, the biggest chunk. I won't go into why that's good or bad. So the reason we sell military hardware is because that 5%, they're assholes, right? You have 5% that doesn't want to trade. They want to take stuff. The intergalactic equivalent of Vikings and pirates, right? They don't want to trade. They'd rather show up, smash you on the head, and take it for free. Because they have a system of evolution and development that has worked for them very well. If someone came along to the Vikings in 600 AD and gave them spaceships and were like, you guys need to take this show on the road, right? Then you would have a species who would be like, oh, sweet, we got boats that go even farther into other worlds and we can show up and smash them in the head and take their stuff. Cool, right? They would love that. So there are species who love the idea of just taking other people's stuff. And there are species who are also scavengers, who, if it's not tied down, they're going to take it. Oh, they're not. They don't have an eye on that. Go, quick, grab that. Bye. Okay. Kiss your stuff that you're not looking after. Goodbye. So you have that 5% which doesn't want to play nice, doesn't want to trade nice, and they would rather take stuff. They would rather be not nice about it. So that's why we need military hardware, that's why we need a space force, that's why we need a military, that's why we export that military technology. Because we make better stuff. We make faster ships, we make better ray guns. It all works. All right, so I'll backtrack a bit now. So that brings us back to the original conversation. Take me to your leader, hoax invasion, right? I got off topic a little bit there. That's all right, this is all important stuff. So the problem, one of the major logistical problems with Take Me to Your Leader, we said it was acceptance. That's an issue. The other problem, which I barely started to touch upon, which is the number of extraterrestrials that we would need to participate in that program. Millions and millions. You think we could trust millions and millions of extraterrestrials?
No.
Well, I bet we can trust most of them. But when you're talking about millions, doesn't take very many percentage points to create a problem. 1% of a million is a lot. Right? 1% of 10 million is a lot. 0.5% of 10 million is a lot. And if all of a sudden we have to keep an eye on every single extraterrestrial who's coming down to try and help us get to babysit everybody for 3 to 5 years, when we get everybody on page, means that you have to keep an eye on them. As a military, we have to keep an eye on them. We can't just trust, oh, they're all doing their job, it's all going to be fine, we're just going to not watch and presume everything's fine. No, it means we have to keep an eye on them. It means we have to watch their backs, it means we have to watch over their shoulders, it means we have to keep an eye on everything that's happening. It means that if something goes wrong, and we get a report on that, we're going to have people that we have to go investigate it, we have to deal with it, and we find out someone's doing they're not supposed to do, and then we have to say, you have to stop that, or you have to leave right now, or we have to put handcuffs on them, or the equivalent, and arrest them. Right? That's a logistical nightmare. We're not looking forward to that. So, acceptance is a problem. Trust is a problem. The sheer volume of that many extraterrestrial species on our planet without it creating the backlash of civilians to think that they're being invaded anyway. How many people do you think, if 10 million extraterrestrials showed up all over the world but were nice, no guns, no body armor, hey, how's it going? Like, how many people do you think on our planet would immediately presume we're being invaded?
A lot.
A lot is the correct answer to that question. So, that brings us to option B. Just have an invasion. Let's just have one. We'll invite some friends. We'll let them play the invader.